Martin. I'll be with you for the next 2 hours here at WINY since about 1960, bringing you two-way talk in northeastern Connecticut. We're going to need your help today and your participation to make this program good. I hope that you'll consider giving me a call at 928-2721. If you're calling from the Plainfield area, the number is 774-5161. Talking this morning about a subject of great interest to me, the subject of mentoring and mentors. This is a terminology that we're hearing more about all the time in recent years. Fairly recently, some of you may have seen a program on public television where Bill Moyers who's just a fantastic interviewer, really the dean of this type of interview program in our time, was interviewing the poet Robert Bly, and they were talking about this whole issue of mentoring. A mentor is a wise or trusted counselor, defined in the dictionary, an old word, but which is gaining prominence, I think, because of as our society increasingly has grown more and more complex, it has become more difficult for men, particularly who are busy in careers, to have the kinds of relationships with other men that they need to for their psychological and mental well-being. Men tend to be proud and independent, and their egos get in the way of building the kinds of relationships that women have. Women seem to be better at building friendships and spending time with one another and relying on one another and helping one another, giving one another advice. There's something in the personality of the male that makes this more difficult. But I think that men need these relationships also. The program that catch my wind, the program that Moyers did with Robert Bly, the poet, got into a lot of other stuff about men going off on retreats with one another and sort of loving and hugging and supporting one another. And I was less interested in that aspect of it as I was in the day-to-day, week-to-week process of men developing relationships with one another to help one another through the difficult times of life. In trying to give myself some focus on the subject for today, mentoring and mentors, I made a list of men who have been important in my life, and I'm not going to tell you anybody's name or invade anybody's privacy or my own in doing so, but I can describe some of them generically. And I was trying to, by listing the names of people and thinking back on relationships with different friends over the years, older men friends, because I'm 41, and so mentor relationships that I've had at this point in my life have mostly been where I was being mentored by somebody older than me. Now I've gotten to the age where it seems that the responsibility now starts to be two-way, and that I have an opportunity and an obligation to begin to, if anybody wants the relationship, to mentor younger men, to pick one or two or three people or whatever people, my business or my church work or my neighborhood situation or whatever, put me together. Whoever life puts me together with, puts me in contact with, there becomes an opportunity to mentor to younger men. And looking at the list, I realized that because I've moved around and been in different occupations and have not stayed in one area that long, that some of these relationships where somebody was mentoring me, not perhaps knowing that they were a mentor. I guess it's in my mind that I appreciate them as mentors. I'm realizing that many of these were not real long-term relationships, but all of them taken together amount to the same thing. I don't think you need to have just one mentor over a whole lifetime or a whole career, though that is the case with some people. I think that what's important is the principle involved, and that is that a man, when he reaches maturity and becomes essentially whole psychologically and has had experience and been through some of the hard things in life, the different stages of marriage and a relationship with a spouse, raising children, going through some of the financial struggles that you do in your young adult life and in the prime of your adult life, and having been through those kinds of things, that you can then begin to share some of your experience with younger men and help younger men get through these different life stages. And as the society has become more complex, and people are working more hours and are more busy, and life becomes sort of fragmented, it seems to be increasingly important to make an actual effort, to make a conscious, specific effort to make some of these contacts with other men for the good of us individually and for the good of society. I'd be interested in hearing from you if you have had a mentor in your life. Who was the mentor in your life? Or have you, like me, had a succession of older men who have been helpful to you? Don't mean to leave the ladies out on this. We'll be back with more right after this. I was just about out of wind after that last monologue about mentoring. I need your help so that I don't have to talk nonstop here for the next hour. We're talking about mentoring, and I'd be interested in knowing whether any of the men in the audience, from either side of the relationship, feel that they have been part of a mentor relationship where either you're an older gentleman who has made the effort to get to know younger men, perhaps in a place where you work. Perhaps you're skilled at a trade, and you have made the effort to pass on some of your skills and experience and knowledge and wisdom to a younger man in a place of work. Perhaps it has been in a church situation. It seems to me that the churches are a good place to put men of different ages in relationships with one another so that they get to really know one another well in a church situation. That has been my experience. I know many men in their 60s, 70s, and 80s that I've gotten to know in church, and men that seemed to me to deliberately be making the effort to help the younger men cope with some of the stresses that they know from their experience are go along with the turf. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Hi.
Could you define mentor as a sponsorship also?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, a sponsor would be a good synonym for it.
Because I know in industry or business, to get a promotion, you have to have somebody bring up your name at a meeting. Say this John Doe here would make a good foreman or a good.
Yeah, you're right. That's so in the workplace, and also fraternal organizations like the Masons, for instance,
the Elks, you have to have
or the Elks. That's a kind of place where men can develop relationships, where a young man can develop a relationship with an older man, and usually Well, I've been approached at different times in my life by an older gentleman who said, you would really have fun in a such-and-such organization. Would you let me suggest your name? And that is a way of, part of what I haven't been able to communicate about this mentor relationship is that all of us need to have a feeling of being important and being appreciated. And life is rough. We're talking mostly about men today. Life is rough for all of us. It's the nature of it. But it's reassuring for a young man to know that the guys that have already been through that life stage that we're at have been through it and understand what the problems and the stresses of it are, the problems in marital relationships, the disappointment sometimes in raising children, that everything isn't turning out quite the way you had dreamed that it might, that some of your dreams, your financial dreams aren't going to come true, that you thought you had ambitions in your career that seem like perhaps they're not going to work out. We need to know that other people know what our lives are like.
No, well, in this industry, you can't brag about your own accomplishments. Somebody else has to do the bragging for you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're regarded as a braggart.
Yeah, and say, this is a nice young man. He's doing good work. He would be suitable to move up to the such-and-such department. Do you feel that you've been able to be that kind of help to any younger men?
No, but someone was more of a sponsor, sponsored me.
Somebody sponsored you?
Yes, it's for advancement.
You can think of that person now?
Yeah.
Yeah? Is that person living?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah? Well, you ought to thank him.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for calling. Isham Martin on the WINY Talk Show. We're talking about mentoring today. I'm looking at my list of men. I wrote down the names, and I'm not going to tell you people's names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, and a lot of these folks live around here. But, there's a guy here that was an educator who's living. And this person just occasionally chats with me someplace, invites me to his home. I am aware that he is aware of my work, what kind of work that I'm doing, who my children are, what kind of, what the kids are like and what the kids are interested in. And this particular person sort of lets me know that he in his career was interested in the same kinds of things that I am, and encourages me. I'm looking at this list, and as I look at this list, one of the things that jumps out at me is that most of these people, if you knew them, you would say that that psychologically they're very whole people, that they are completely mature people. And I guess before you can begin to be able to be sensitive to the needs of somebody else and to be able to give some of yourself away to somebody else, you must first be whole yourself. You've got to be pretty well adjusted psychologically and have your feet on the ground and have a pretty sure sense of who you are. And it's not a trait that is common to all of us, that we're able to see things from the perspective of the other person. Most of us tend to be self-centered, and it's an outstanding quality when a person can grow to a state of maturity where they're thinking not just about themselves and their own point of view, but are actually able to think, well, Ham Martin is somebody who is a nice fellow. I bet he could use my help about such and such. Gary O is a nice fellow. I'm going to encourage him, and I'm going to suggest to him that he joined such and such an organization, or that, I've got an idea that Gary would like to hear about that might help him in his career, that type of thing. And it's not everybody that can set themselves aside, that can set their own interests and their own life and their own worries. A lot of people that are older have health problems, for instance. Wouldn't be unusual that a man in his 70s that would have his own health problems, would have his own worries about his own mortality and how much longer he was going to live, and might have some people may have fears related to their own life and their own eventual demise. And it's not everybody that can put that aside and be able to dwell on what the needs are of a younger man. I would say that it's rather unusual. And as I look down the list here, I would say that the people that have stood out in my life are people that are very whole psychologically, sufficiently strong in who they are themselves to be able to give some of themselves away to somebody else. Looking at another name here, this person I would say was less whole psychologically, less complete, had some frustrations, but was a neighbor who was a tremendous help to me when I was first starting in business. Then another neighbor, able to give a lot of help about family matters. Then here's a guy in the woodworking business who was a tremendous help to me when I was starting out in woodworking. From this person and from a couple other names here, I can draw another generalization that a mentor is a person who is not, a mentor in the workplace or who is in the same trade as you or the same profession. And I bet that this would carry through in banking or insurance or real estate or a lot of businesses that are fairly competitive, as well as woodworking, which most of my career has been in, that somebody that a true mentor in the professional sense is somebody that would not be insecure about giving away any of the tricks of the trade, would not be insecure about passing on some of his know-how to a younger man for fear that person might take some business away from them. The mentor would be happy to share knowledge, tricks of the trade that he had developed over a career, would be happy to share those things with the younger man. Another generalization, not a generalization, but an observation that I can make looking at my list, is that many of these people had sons of their own, and in some cases were not able to develop these kinds of mentor relationships with their own sons. And that is a very interesting point, which I'll come back to in just a minute, but let me take a phone call here. Good morning, you're on the air.
Good morning. When you were writing a column for the paper, how were you able to get that job?
How was I able to get it?
Who did somebody call on you, or did you apply for it?
That was my own idea, actually. I had left politics and was stuck at home by myself in the basement, doing my woodworking. And I guess that was the same motivation that's led me to this radio job when the opportunity availed itself. That just maybe a need to express myself and to share ideas and to be in contact with other people. Most of us need contact with other people. Most of us cannot exist in a social vacuum. We need to be with other humans.
Yeah, I know. I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how anybody can pull themselves into a shell and never try to give of themselves in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'm talking.
My husband is a mentor. Mentor. He's been since the time he worked at every job, and this is unusual because he's been retired now, and people still remember the type of work he did and his ability, and the young fellows that he took under his wing and became like a father figure for that didn't have any father.
Right.
They liked him, and he showed them. He wasn't mean, but he was firm, and he showed them how to apply themselves. And to this day, I hear a lot of nice things about his work and about the type of person he is. As a matter of fact, he's much better liked than I am. Because yes, he is, and I agree. Because
you're that lady on the radio.
Yeah, well, see, I'm too outspoken, and
oh, that's all right.
He's not like that. He's quiet, and he's always the same.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't get frustrated. In other words, he accepts life better than I do.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you mentioned about teaching men how to work, younger men how to work. It's an interesting thing. There are some young men that you meet that you realize that no older man ever showed them what real work is like and how you act when you're working and when you're working for somebody else, and how to keep yourself moving, and that and that and somebody has to say to some young men, this is not the way you're approaching this job is not satisfactory. You're not pushing yourself hard enough. You're not efficient the way you move your body from place to place. You're wasting effort. Even something as simple as how you lean on a spade and how you position your body and how you get the maximum out of your maximum work out of your effort doing manual things. There are some young people that you meet that you realize nobody has shown them how to work, and this so that's something in the workplace that a mentor. It doesn't mean you have to adopt somebody for a whole lifetime and be responsible for their success or failure, but you're doing a young man a favor if you can constructively criticize the way they approach a job.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I agree. Yep.
Well, thank you for calling.
Bye-bye.
So, we're talking, I was mentioning just before that call that as I look at my list, I realize that a lot of these guys who've been a help to me had sons of their own. And if you saw the Robert Bly program with Bill Moyers, Robert Bly is a poet, and he gives lectures on this subject and has been, is very poignant and really touches men when he speaks. And one of the things that I saw in that program was some of the men that he was talking with, younger men that he was talking with, saying that, expressing a frustration that they had not been able to develop these kinds of relationships with their fathers, that their fathers had failed to be able to pass on the kinds of information that a mentor should be able to pass on, and that this was a frustration for them. And Robert Bly responded very matter-of-factly that this was absolutely typical, not universal, but typical, and that between fathers and sons that there was a tension that was almost like a sexual tension, that there were psychological barriers that prevented this mentoring relationship in its most ideal variety from existing between fathers and sons. And he said it was sort of a Freudian, I guess, explanation. He said the problem is that that the father and the son both are in love with the same woman, and that is and that's the problem. The father loves the husband, and the son loves mom, and that the competition for mom is part of the tension that exists between them that prevents them from having this mentor relationship. Well, I don't know if that's true in every case, but I think that it is true in some. At any rate, I know in my own relationship with my father that there was a tension there that prevented my being able to have the kinds of conversations that I would have liked to have had with my own dad. And he didn't live long enough to pass on to me everything that he might have liked to have, and that might eventually, the relationship might eventually have grown in a different direction. But during his lifetime, he was an example to me, and I learned a lot from him. But as far as being able to sit down and him say, now, son, in your marriage, you're going to have this such and such is going to happen, and this is the way I would deal with it based on my experience. Or you're going to have these financial stresses, and I had them, and this is the way I dealt with them. And I think that now, with the perspective that I have, if you do such and so, that it'll all work out. Those conversations simply did not exist. Did they exist in your relationship with your father? I wish that they had in mind, but they didn't. And I thank goodness for relationships I've had with other men since my dad died that have helped me along. Good morning. You're on the air.
Isham.
Yes, hi.
I think you're on the verge of crawling onto the lobster boat here.
You think so?
Well, let me offer you one marvelous...
You're going to save me?
Well, let me offer one marvelous quote from Mark Twain.
Yep.
I don't know exactly how it went, but it was something like this. When I left home at 18 years old, I was convinced my father was the biggest jackass on the face of the earth. I went back to reconcile myself 5 years later, and it was incredible how much the old buzzard had learned.
Right. Is your father living?
Yes.
Okay, how's that relationship going?
Very well.
It is. That's good. Is he nearby?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you're able to visit with him?
Oh,
and,
sure, we do all the time.
Can you talk about, can you get out, can you look like a beer commercial and get out there on that boat and with the three generations and talk about life?
Somewhat, yeah. It was a rough time during the adolescent years, but it's pretty stable now.
That's good.
We do very different things, so there's not a lot of common ground in terms of occupation.
Mm-hmm.
But we're finding more and more common ground as the years go by, and I'm very glad that he's around to share them with.
Well, anybody else? Are there other older men that you could call a mentor?
Not in any kind of a long-term relationship, but certainly there have been people in work situations who have shown me quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. I think that what I'm trying to describe is an evolution. Maybe it's just that the term is being used in a broader sense today. A mentor historically had been somebody that over a whole lifetime or a whole career was the one shining example to you that took you under his arm and showed you the way and passed the baton to you, say in a profession or in politics or in show business or something sort of splashy. And what Robert Bly is saying is that our lives are complicated and busy, and that men's arrogance and vanity has prevented them from having some of the kinds of relationships that they actually need in order to sustain themselves emotionally and psychologically, and that you don't have to have just one person, but that. And I think from what I saw, he mainly was trying to put the onus on the older men to seek out younger men that they feel that they might be able to help.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is, you say I'm ready to crawl onto the lobster boat, and I'm not sure where it is I'm ready to crawl, but I know I need that kind of help, and I suspect that other men do too.
You're not going to get a lot of men to talk about this because this kind of talk makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know, it's somehow effeminate or something.
Yeah.
You know. And I know that's not a legitimate feeling, but you know, it's deep in the bones there.
Yeah, you're right.
It's hard to overcome.
Yeah. But that's what you saw in these retreats that this bly does, is you saw some of these men breaking down and some of these barriers breaking down.
No, men don't want to break down.
No.
I mean, it's just societal, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to do that.
Right.
Well, anyway.
Okay, thanks for calling.
Thanks
you. For I haven't had to start rubber banding the lobster claws yet.
All right.
Okay, thanks for calling.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Isham Martin on the WINY Talk Show. We're talking about mentors and mentoring. We'll be right back. We've got one call coming in. Somebody not afraid to talk about it. Isham Martin on the talk show talking about mentoring. We'll get to that call in a minute, but first let's check Bob Harris's forecast, brought to us today by Safeway Petroleum.
Good morning.
It's 47 degrees in Putnam by the Cargo Falls. Let's go to the phones. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm fine, thank you.
I hope you're not disappointed, but I am not going to talk on your subject today. I'm just going to ask you, at a future date, can you have a program where people just call in about the pet peeves?
Sure.
I would enjoy that tremendously.
Oh.
But you have a good day, and it is a very interesting program, but I don't have anything to say on it.
That's
but
quite
I
all
said,
right.
one of these days I'm going to call Aisha, and I'm going to, get brave enough and
Pet
ask you to
peeves.
do that.
Okay, thanks
Have
a lot.
a good day. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. That woman would like to talk about pet peeves sometime. I'm sure that we can do that. That'd probably be an easy one because everybody's got pet peeves. Getting back to my list, we're talking about mentors today. Who was your mentor? And have you had any... This pertains mainly to the relationships between men, and at least the way we're talking about it, it does. It doesn't have to be just men. I'm sure that women have mentors, and older women mentor younger women, but I'm looking at it from the male perspective today because I'm using my own experience as a way of developing the issue. Looking on at some of the other men, and I observed that a lot of these people who have had an influence on me, who have taken the trouble to help me, are men that have had their own sons, and I'm aware that in some of their relationships have not really been very good, and that they may not be able to mentor their own sons in the way they could somebody outside of their family. Sometimes there are just psychological tensions there that are too great that stand in the way of them developing these kinds of relationships. And the previous caller with the quote from Mark Twain sort of was along those same lines. Here's another fellow that was in journalism when I was writing my little newspaper column. I got to know him through politics when I ran for the legislature once. A man that took a liking to me and that continued over a long period of time to make the effort to make contact with me, to get together with me for breakfast, to talk about our respective lives, and to be an encouragement to a younger man. I remember coming back from the Pancake House in Vernon after having breakfast with this gentleman, and always having my spirits buoyed and being encouraged. Pretty nice to realize that somebody that's not even a family member, an older gentleman, would care enough about you to get in contact with you for no personal gain of his, but just to encourage a younger man. Have you had that experience? Is there anybody out there listening who's had that kind of experience and would be willing to share what that has meant in your lives? Previous caller said not many men are going to be willing to call you and to talk about this subject, or are really willing to talk about it generally, that men are too proud, and that it's sort of effeminate, the caller said, to reveal your weaknesses, to let your guard down, and to talk about your needs for somebody else to help you. But that's what we're talking about. Anybody out there willing to share with us about that today? I think it's an interesting subject. We'd be interested in having your calls, and we'll be right back.
Blue Cross.
We're back. Isham Martin on the WINY Talk Show. I'll be with you for the next hour today. The number here is 928-2721. The lines have been busy at different times this morning, and you may have been trying to get through and have been unable to get through. The number is 928-2721. If you're calling from the Plainfield area, the number is 774-5161. And by the way, the opinions expressed on the talk show are not necessarily those of WINY. It's staff, management, sponsors, or news department. Okay, getting back to my list, because my list of people who have, I don't think deliberately known that they were mentoring me, because some people are not even familiar with the terminology. They know that there's a word mentor and they could tell you what it is, but the idea of mentoring being a conscious, deliberate act or to deliberately make an effort to develop a mentor relationship because of an acknowledged need that we know exists. I am getting ready to crawl on a lobster boat. It's a new thing. It's a new concept that we would deliberately work on mentor relationships because we know that it is important to the society to do that, that men increasingly are becoming isolated from relationships with other men because of the busyness of society. And I said before that the churches, I think, are one place where these mentor relationships can develop, because a church puts men of different ages together in doing the business of the church and running programs and worshiping together. It puts men of different ages in contact with one another in a way that almost nothing else does. How about a social mentor, that somebody that just, I can think of two men that I know quite well, considerably older than me, who have shown me and my contemporaries how to have fun and how to be a host and how to be gracious in sharing what you have with other people. And those men have taken younger men under their wings to try to teach younger men some things about life. Here's a guy that I can talk about quite candidly because he's hundreds of miles away and I haven't seen him in a long time. But I had a friend when I was working in Washington, D.C., named Bob Pyle. First met Bob Pyle through when my boss was first elected to Congress. This man was somebody that the Republican Congressional Committee recommended to my boss as somebody that could help him get organized in Washington during his first months and make contacts and sort of learn the ropes and how to set up an office and how to get your telephones installed and these kinds of things. And this man had, I believe, 3 sons of his own and a daughter, a busy family and obligations with his own family, but this man took the effort to take me to lunch and to tell me some things about politics and how Washington, D.C. worked, and he took me to play golf a couple times, and I remember having conversations with him over lunch, and I remember one time I used curse words in conversation. I think I said damn or hell or something in conversation. And he said, Ham, that's very unattractive. He said, a gentleman doesn't use language like that in conversation. And he said the effect that it creates isn't worth the low opinion that some people will have of you if you use that kind of language, and cut it out. And it must have been habitual with me at that time. I'm embarrassed to say now because I don't think that I curse in my conversation today, but I must have done it again at the same lunch, and he really scolded me. And I realized that he really wished me well, and he really, I think that he was hoping that I would have some kind of a career in public life, and he didn't want, he thought he could point something out to me that might be an impediment to my getting ahead. And I appreciated it then, and I appreciate it now. So Bob Pyle, he was a mentor to me, and I think that he deliberately, I think that he knew what he was doing, and that he was trying to be a mentor for me. Whether he put that name to it or not, I don't know. But I certainly still appreciate him. In politics, somebody that's dead, Horace Seeley Brown, whose daughter I know very well today. I remember Horace Seeley Brown in a couple of meetings I was at with him, that he was a man that was, even though his political career was over, he was able to communicate clearly to younger men that were in government or in politics that he wished them well, that he knew what they were going through, and that he liked you, and that he wished you well, and that his ego and his career and the fact that his career was over, these issues were not in the way of him having a genuine sense of goodwill for you. And I had that same experience with a man named Roger Eddy, who some of you have seen on television from, he also has been a friend of Lowell Weiker's. Roger Eddy was a guy that could talk to a young man, and you had the sense that he was able to, that his personality was whole, that his life had been good, and that he could have a genuine feeling of goodwill towards somebody else. So most of these people in my life have not been one mentor that is a lifelong mentor, and I don't think that that's really necessary. I think what's necessary is to have a combination of relationships with older men who've been through some of the things that you haven't been through yet, but that you're just beginning to go through, to give you a sense that it's all going to be all right, that things are going to work out, that you're going to get through it, and that they appreciate what you're going through. I'm going to try and talk about this more in the second hour. I hope to entice some of your calls. Maybe you're just enjoying listening to me ramble. If I start talking about the lobsters, save me, as the last caller did. We'll be back in the second hour. Thanks for joining me. It's 10 o'clock.
Parents work, the mother's not home. There's just not time enough in a day, you know. And the children almost were neglected.
Yep.
And this is what's happening to us right now.
Yep.
And I say we got to sit back. I don't have any children in school now or nothing like that, but I'm trying to talk for others. Sit back and pay attention. This is what it's all about.
Right.
And Donald St. Ange, did he ever do me a favor? Because I couldn't get across what I really wanted to say.
Okay.
And I sat and listened to him, and I said, wow, there's an educated man. Okay?
Okay.
I said it.
Thank you. Bye. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Hi.
I also agree with Mayor St. Ange on our government giving out, spending money foolishly on frivolous grants.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, there was a UConn professor who received a grant of $300,000 to further study why the foliage turns color in the fall.
Well, don't you want to know?
What?
Don't you want to know?
Yeah, but can't we accept that's part of God's master plan? And it's nature painting a picture? Do we have to spend $300,000?
Right.
It's going to happen every day, every fall anyway.
Right. I don't know what that grant was all about. It sounds unnecessary to me, too, but I'll tell you one thing.
They could take that $300,000 and break it up and give out scholarships to deserving kids.
Yeah. However, plant science, botany, agriculture, something that UConn has been very big in for a long time. I'm thinking at this time of year with the elections just over what's going to happen in the Department of Agriculture. I think it would be terrific to get a commissioner of agriculture from northeastern Connecticut again. John McDonald from Pomfret during the Mescal administration for a time, was Commissioner of Agriculture, and then he went into the gaming board or the lottery or whatever they called it. I'm not recommending John for that job again. He was involved with the Wecker campaign, but I dare say we've got talent in northeastern Connecticut. We've had Ken Anderson from Woodstock, and then he moved to Eastford, has been the commissioner under the O'Neill administration. And this is one of the big agricultural parts of the state, and I hope that we can get that spot again, and that Weicker will put somebody in there that really has a vision for what agriculture can be again, and how that can play into the economy here.
Yeah,
I think it would be great.
UConn used to be known as an agricultural college, but
Yeah.
since it's reached the university status, is it still recognized as such?
Well, they certainly aren't getting the enrollment anymore that is interested, in the dairy farming and the traditional agriculture. They still are, I think, strong in some of the agronomy and plant science and botany and that type of thing, but I don't think it's what it once was in traditional agriculture. But I think that there are visionary people who know what is possible in that area with new farming methods and new research and new crops. And I'm sounding like Dukakis, aren't I, with the Belgian endive, But I hope that it will be interesting to see what all of our contact